Hi, third graders. Mrs. D here. Today, I want to talk more about the idea of comparing fractions and using symbols such as is greater than. So when you see this symbol, you say the words is greater than, is less than, and is equal to. You might remember that the open part of the symbol eats the bigger number. In this case, we're going to compare fractions. So I pulled out my piece for 1/2, and I also pulled out 1/12 to show you so that you can see with your eyes that 1/2 is much bigger than 1/12. And then I wrote a number sentence. 1/2 is greater than 1/12. Sometimes kids get tricked when comparing fractions because some kids think, well, wait a second, 2 is much smaller than 12. So half must be less than 12ths. But you can see with your eyes that it's certainly not. So I want to talk to you about the idea that fractions name parts of a whole and the denominator names the total number of equal parts. So if I had a chocolate bar, and I really like chocolate, and I split it in half, this is what my halves would look like. But if I wanted to share it with 11 other friends, I would need 12ths. And you can see with your eyes that if I had to divide that same size whole, here's my whole, into 12 equal parts, well, the parts are going to be a whole lot smaller. So the bigger the denominator is, the more parts the whole is divided into, and the smaller those parts will be. You can see that clearly with my model here. This is a whole, and if it was a chocolate bar, this is what a half would look like, and this is what a 12th would look like. That's why a 12th is smaller or less than a half. Remember, boys and girls, the bigger the denominator, the fraction is, the more parts that whole is divided into. And because of that, those parts are also going to be smaller. So keep that in mind. Let me put these back. And let me just talk to you for a second about comparing unit fractions. 1/12 and 1/5. You might recall that a unit fraction has a numerator of 1. When comparing unit fractions, boys and girls, the bigger denominator is the smaller fraction always. 1/12 is less than 1/5. And you can see that if I pull any of these out here. When you compare unit fractions that have 1 as a numerator, the bigger denominator is the smaller fraction for the reasons I just talked about. 1/6 means a whole is divided into 6 equal parts, and 1/4 means 4 equal parts. Well, if you divide that chocolate bar into 4 parts, each of those parts is going to be bigger than if you divided that chocolate bar into 6 equal parts. So when comparing unit fractions, the unit fraction with the bigger denominator is the smaller fraction. It's opposite what you might think. Now, let me show you what happens when you have two fractions that have the same numerator. You're then going to look at the denominators. I'm going to show you with my models. Here I have 2/3 and I have 2/4. 2/3 and 2/4. When you're comparing fractions and the numerators are the same, you look at the denominators. And you have to think to yourself, what pieces are bigger? Are thirds bigger or fourths bigger? And so in this particular case, when the numerators are the same, you look at the denominators. The smaller denominator is the bigger fraction. Thirds are bigger than fourths. If you have that Hershey bar, here it is again, and you divide it into 3 equal parts, thirds are going to be a little bit bigger than fourths. 3 parts are bigger than 4 parts. So when you're comparing fractions with the same numerator, you look at the denominators. The denominator that is smaller is the bigger fraction. I wanted to share some of these ideas with you to help you kind of understand how you should be thinking about fractions when comparing them. Oh, and don't forget, you can only compare fractions when you have two equally sized wholes. In my last video, I said you can't compare a pizza to an apple. If I said I ate a half of an apple and a half of a pizza, those two halves are certainly not the same because a pizza and an apple are not the same size either. So remember, you can only compare fractions when the wholes are equal. So that's how you can use models to compare fractions. And I want to show you now how you can draw your own. I'm going to compare 2/3 and 5/6. I can draw a model to support my thinking, and this is how. I always tell kids, draw a really big rectangle and split it into two smaller rectangles. And the reason why is because then you know for sure you have two totally equal size holes. This is a hole and this is a hole. So the first fraction says 2/3. So I'm going to divide this hole into thirds. And this one I'm going to divide into 6. And I can do that by making thirds first and then finding the middle and making sixths. Now, all I have to do is shade in 2/3. And I'm just doing it quickly. You can do a much neater job when you do your own models. And then 5/6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Check it out. Now I can see by using a model that 2/3 is less than 5/6. Or you can also write 5/6 is greater than 2/3. So I wanted to show you, boys and girls, how you can make your own models when trying to figure out how to compare two fractions. It's really important when kids are learning about fractions to use visuals, models like this, or models like the ones we gave to you. These are fraction strips that you could color and cut out so that you have model pieces just like these ones. Moving them around and checking things out by exploring with models really, really helps kids understand fractions. Okay, boys and girls, we'll see you next time.